Well, thanks for the introduction, Dan, and good morning, Rick. It's great to be with you again. We were together a couple of weeks ago with my colleague, Marcos Diaz-Gonzalez at the Center for Building Infrastructure and Public Spaces at Columbia University. And your talk there to the students at Columbia, I came away inspired, because it was like a master's class of how to get big things done in a region. So thank you for that. And I'm delighted to be here this morning to hopefully continue that conversation.
Great. Well, pleased to be with you. Great.
Yeah. So Rick and I go back a few years, probably just before you're starting at the Port Authority. And Rick, I can only describe your investment in infrastructure as everything from, implementing great public policy to getting down and walking the infrastructure if you're trying to finish construction. So when you see somebody like Rick Cotton, it's not just about leverage ratios on debt to get something built. It's also about the patterns and the floor tiles of opening a station or a rail terminal. So again, delighted to be here. So we have a few minutes this morning. I thought we would frame this a little bit about today and mostly about tomorrow, because I think as we sit here today, there's a lot of lessons learned and takeaways. But maybe we'll just start out with, as you think about infrastructure and the Port Authority, and we heard in Dan's introduction, the size of your program, the impact it has on the region. How do you thread that needle between daily operations and transformative infrastructure? How do you think about that?
Well, sometimes I think you have to manufacture additional hours in the day. I don't think you can separate them. And I just have to start our discussion off, Greg, by saying last week, if you're involved in infrastructure, was an extraordinary week for the Port Authority with respect to our $10 billion project in the middle of the west side of Manhattan, which is an extraordinary challenge. But we got, after 6.5 years of effort, the federal NEPA approval, and within 24 hours of that received the final approval from the city ULURP process. So for those of you who have been through permitting processes, to get two major ones to coalesce and come together and reach their conclusion within 24 hours. I know nothing happened in the real world, but in the world in which one lives in terms of infrastructure, it was an extraordinary week for the Port Authority. I think of those as being inextricably linked, I guess what I would say, Greg. And I think one of the premier lessons one learns in terms of big organizations, which extends to big projects, is that the inertial forces, the natural forces, are toward stasis and, with apologies to anyone who's offended, and toward mediocre performance. And so I think your challenge day to day, both in the big picture and in the little picture, is to pay attention, have the organization, all of the organizations who are involved, recognize that there is attention from the top and there is support for people who are trying to get things done. You have to identify particularly insidious as disagreements between individuals in all good faith in an organization about how to proceed. They can be disagreements between construction companies and architects, between construction companies and sponsors. It can be within a government agency, but the result of disagreement, particularly if it's passionately felt, is paralysis. So I think my answer to your question, Greg, is you've got to go from top to bottom, moving things forward, supporting people who are trying to get things done, resolving disagreements, not necessarily because you know better, but because the disagreement causes paralysis, and you got to get past that. So I think it's the role in a big organization to drive for forward movement and to drive for speed, to communicate that and find everywhere from top to bottom how you can support that.
You did extensive stakeholder engagement with the Port Authority Bus Terminal. How has that shaped what is eventually going to be built there?
Well, it actually is a remarkable story because we started out with a design. This was a very controversial project for multiple years at the Port Authority. States of New York and New Jersey were at each other's throats and nothing was happening. So had to get past that. Just to keep the story short, we did get past that. We came up with a design, negotiated agreement within the Port Authority, not the real world, but within a large bi-state agency, and put it into the NEPA environmental review process. And we actually thought, since we'd figured out a design that satisfied New York and New Jersey, that we were off to the races, and we were very proud of ourselves. We put the design out, and the feedback, which actually we were taken quite by surprise, from the city and from the community, was NFW. Completely unacceptable. Why? Now, this just shows you in some sense that government agencies don't always have their finger on the pulse of the community. But the answer was, so in terms of the community around the bus terminal, there were lots of buses on the streets for different reasons. There were budget buses dropping off and picking up because they didn't, in terms of the size of the bus terminal and the fees of the bus terminal, didn't want to use the bus terminal. From the community's point of view, terrible. The operation of a bus terminal, it turns out, is a ballet dance because every gate has to service, during rush hours, 3 or 4 or sometimes 5 buses in the space of 1 hour in order to serve. Well, if you're going to do that, you have to have buses pull in, load or unload, pull out, and then have the next bus standing by, ready to pull in and do the same thing. And you have to do it repetitively and endlessly. With a slightly undersized bus terminal, where the staging, the standing by takes place, is outside the facility, and in this case, on the streets of the community, idling. Drives the community crazy. The other thing is, most of the buses coming into the terminal come from New Jersey. They come in through the Lincoln Tunnel in rush hour. They drop off their passengers. Well, what do? No place for them to go. So they deadhead back to New Jersey. And then they deadhead in for the evening rush, and drives the community crazy. And that's a community that has almost no green space. Anyway, more detail than you want to know. But that was the feedback. And we completely redid the plan. Doubled the cost from an estimated $4.5 billion to $10 billion. Instead of 1 building, we're building 3 structures. So I somewhat unusually for a government agency, we actually listened to the community. And we actually totally changed our course of action, brought the community in terms of what turned into an incessant series of meetings with the elected officials, with the caution to the community and the elected officials, be careful of what you wish for, because if we build this, it's going to be 8 to 10 years of hell in terms of the community. Well, long story short, we wound up with a design that had the support of every single elected official within whose district, and there are 5 of them, the bus terminal sits. So rather than a NIMBY reaction, which actually one not only would have expected, but is typical in dealing with infrastructure projects, we wound up with complete community support. Now we'll see if we can build it.
Rick, it's a great reminder that big ideas are not necessarily loved by everybody, but speaking of a big project that is loved by everybody, or the airports here in New York City and the region in New Jersey, Newark, why don't you talk a little bit about your successes there, but also be interesting in delivering those big programs that are a success. what are the lessons learned you take to other projects like the bus terminal and further build that at Newark?
Well, the big lesson that I think I've learned in the period of time I've been involved in this business, which isn't all that long, and my prior career is not one that would have led you to believe I'd be in this position. I think of myself as the accidental executive director. In this world, you have to pay attention to the community. You've got to bring it along. Otherwise, you won't get projects done. And if you, no matter how hard you try, if you don't succeed in that, the project is in danger. So we've made just a big, lessons learned, but also, it is the right thing to do in the sense that the communities around these big facilities do suffer inconvenience, call it, from them, and they deserve to have benefits. So we have made one of our top priorities community and involvement, attention to on almost every level, from business opportunities. We're very proud of the fact that our program to do business with minority and women-owned businesses in the airport projects, 3 of them, meaning LaGuardia, Newark, and JFK, just passed the $5 billion mark in terms of value of contracts awarded to MWBEs. And we created at Kennedy, because it's a little bit the granddaddy or grandmother of all of these projects. It's so large. We created a 42-member community development advisory committee, meeting monthly with full disclosure of every aspect of the redevelopment. So if you just look at our community development and relationship activities, which we don't have time to go into, major effort at all 3 projects, and we've wound up with very, very good community relations, and we've worked very well with the elected officials who represent the districts in and around the projects. Other comment just on the airports. The Port Authority airports were routinely god-awful if you go back a decade. I think I don't think this is an exaggeration. Every single major passenger survey would put all 3 airports at the absolute bottom of the list. And they were old. They were out of date. They're beyond their design life. They're outmoded in terms of technology. I like jokingly, this probably get me into trouble, to say that the history of the Port Authority was dominated by very skilled engineers and construction people. Their attitude toward customers was that they were a real nuisance, and they're pissed off about the fact that somebody was using this beautiful facility that they had built. And so one of the things, as you build a facility, there are a lot of things to pay attention to, one of which is customer experience, and it doesn't historically come naturally to a public agency. Many are very good at it, and increasingly that is changing. But it's, what is the customer experience? What's your concept of an airport? And if you really stop and think about it, it's the gateway. Pretty obvious observation, but it is it's the first things people experience if they come to visit. It's the last thing as they leave. And for residents who are in and out, it's interesting. It has a real stickiness in terms of experience. It's either, oh my God, I've got to go to LaGuardia, and that was, LaGuardia was the airport everybody loved to hate, deservedly so. It had tarps, it had leaks, it functioned badly, the concessions were terrible. So you sort of have to turn all that around. And also, one of my complaints about airports is you have no idea where you are when you're inside the airport. It's just modern, both my view in terms of the general approach of today's architect is they love beige, off-white, stainless steel. Actually, this room is not a bad example. And you sort of have to fight that, which is, there's nothing wrong with color, judiciously used. There's nothing wrong with images of the region. There's nothing wrong with figuring out what it is they communicate to visitors and to residents. I mean, in this case, this is a New York airport or this is a New Jersey airport. And we have made a big thing of that as we built the airport. Somewhat obviously, you want the best technology you can get, security check-in. The concessions, again, should be part of the seeing the local aspect of this, and they should be high quality. And I think I've had some fairly intense arm wrestles with developers over whether shops are up to a real quality standard. And so you have to pay attention. You come back a little bit to what you said, Greg, which is attention. You have to pay attention to those details. You have to fight people who will have other motivations. I mean, God bless them in the sense of they are in their own world, and there's not a criticism. It's just that somebody has to be saying, here are the standards, and it's going to have a sense of place. It's going to have customer service. It's going to have quality concessions. And it's also going to have, by the way, public art, which echoes, again, the region. And if you talk to people about the new LaGuardia, about Terminal A at Newark, you wind up talking a lot. Dan made this observation. The reaction is a lot to the public art, and this is not airport art, by the way. It is curated, and public agency does not have the capabilities. So we began by hiring an organization called the Public Art Fund. There are others, museums have helped in some of the terminals. But the point is you have to take each of these aspects really seriously. They have to be very high quality. And you also have to acknowledge what a public agency is good at or not good at, and be sure that you brought in people who are good at the things you need them.
So the takeaway is begin with the customer first, bring the community along. All right, just with a show of hands, who here has commuted through Newark Airport, Terminal A, and LaGuardia? Show of hands. All right. Just by the sound of the applause, let's give the Port Authority team a rating, okay? Let's just hear applause on LaGuardia or Newark Airport. Anybody? Okay. So Rick, you just won the Infraday rating.
So the only thing I have to say, Greg, it was a low bar.
Yeah. Wonderful. So, Rick, let's just pivot to the future a little bit. There's a lot of takeaways in what you've done so far, but the port is not slowing down. As you think about the future, technology, resiliency, talent proofing, to deliver these big programs, how are you thinking about that, you and the team at the Port Authority?
Well, there's a capacity challenge, which is in terms of ambitions, how much can the organization handle? How much funding can you actually assemble? Big projects frequently stumble over funding. There are a lot of challenges, but increasingly resiliency and action and climate change have to be a big part of it. And airports very frequently sit on bodies of water because they're looking for flat land. But in terms of your entire building program, it's got to have high standards. You have to have. We signed up for a net zero. We actually put out a roadmap to net zero. So I think the future is going to be dominated a lot by trying to respond in design terms, particularly from a retrofit perspective, to being able to meet those challenges. And then the capacity challenge, is a daily feature in terms of how much capital capacity do we have? What do we need to do in terms of, are there things we can do? I mean, we're largely self-sustaining. We don't receive any tax money from either New Jersey or New York. There are some airport federal programs that benefit us, but we're out of the, for better, for worse, we're out of the flow of federal or state or city funds. So we have to figure that out. We've done it a lot through P3s. I would say that's in terms of paying attention. The New York area, because it's such an attractive area, has some advantages versus other parts of the country. But it's our focus has to be, as we look at every facility, are there ways to bring private financing into the picture? I think the technology, public agencies are terrible at technology. Technology is changing, but in this room knows it faster than any of us can deal with in our either our personal or our professional lives. Well, public agencies are absolutely at the bottom. That's the private sector has a lot of advantages. I've worked in both. I'm a fan of government, but you have to, as you look at it, you have to see what the shortcomings are. So one of the big challenges is how do you get today's technology, tomorrow's technology built in, because what you're building in right now is gonna be out of date. So I think that, and finally, what I would say is, big organizations almost inevitably their tendency and their preference is to look inwards. They want to look how. That's not how we do it at the Port Authority, because we've done it forever that way, and we wouldn't have done it forever if there was something wrong with it. So you have that change management, but it's particularly intense in terms of technology and best practices. I would summarize that as you have to build into the organization best practices. How's somebody else doing it? Is it better than ours? And then how do we incorporate it? But I think it's all that sort of, you have to deal with all those challenges.
Rick, somebody once told me it just takes a long time to evolve an organization, but what's clear is that you're evolving the Port Authority. It's only when we'll look back that you'll see that progress that you made to look outward, focus on the customer, focus on the community, embrace technology. You up for a bonus question?
Sure, but I'll keep this short. My 25 years before I started in government, I was at NBC Universal, which had many entertainment assets, but had quite a number, 6 to ultimately about 12 local television stations. And one of the best managers of one of those local stations said to me, you have to realize in terms of change, said, if I, as a general manager of a TV station, I change every last thing about my news programming. I change the anchors, I change the set decoration, I change our digital presentation, and I'm really proud of it. He said, in about 2 years, somebody will come up to me on the street and say, isn't there something different about your programming? It takes a long time.
Does indeed. So, for the emerging professionals here, those that are thinking about future infrastructure, what wisdom or guidance would you share with them for these future generations as we're trying to grow that next generation of talent to do big things here in the region?
I think it actually starts with high aspirations and hard work, and I guess I would also say attention to detail. You have to have big ideas. You have to have aspirations. You have to work hard. You have to want to get things done. You got to try to disengage from process. It's the other thing about big organizations that everybody in this room knows. Big organizations love process, and that has nothing to do with the outside world. It just doesn't. And the other thing that I say, which sounds very harsh, is you get no credit for effort. None. Doesn't matter how hard you work if you don't accomplish something. And so having that sense that it's about accomplishing something, it's about having high aspirations. In order to get things out, you have to pay attention to detail, or things will go crazy. And and they're symbols. They're things that convey to people inside and outside the organization. Typos drive me crazy. And the reason it is because it says something to people. If you give them something that's filled with typos, even one or two, it just says, who's paying attention to anything? So but it's that sense of really wanting things to work well, get things done, sort of figure out how organizations, networking is very important, relationships. And that's the other thing is, you can think you're the smartest person in the room, but that isn't going to help you very much in terms of getting something done in a big organization. And so you have to figure out both how to work with people and develop relationships in, a little cold-blooded, but in the service of getting things done. So I think, that kind of framework is what I would say.
Great advice, Rick, and thank you for sharing. Thank you for your leadership of the Port Authority. That drive, that passion for excellence is evident in the big programs that have been done and gives us great optimism for what comes next. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Greg.